Hello there friends, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. So I thought I would share with you guys what I'm planning to read this summer. I have a lovely stack of books that I just went and collected from all over my shelves. They are all classics because I'm hoping to read and reread a variety of classics this summer. So I thought I would sit down, share the pile with you. Let's get to it. So I thought we would start with a book that I actually just finished. It's called A Lost Lady by Willa Cather. I picked it up for $3 at a used bookstore, and I wasn't sure I was going to like it. I definitely did like it. I'll save my specific thoughts for my June reading blog, which will be up next Friday, so make sure you're subscribed and stay tuned for that. But there was an excellent passage in here about just this character, Neil, his experience with classics, because his uncle, the judge, has a whole set of great books in his library, which he himself doesn't really read. But Neil ends up making acquaintance with all these books, and I absolutely love Willa Cather's description of it. If anyone had told him that these were classics and represented the wisdom of the ages, he would doubtless have let them alone. But ever since he had first found them for himself, he had been living a double life with all its guilty enjoyments. He read the Heroides over and over and felt that they were the most glowing love stories ever told. He did not think of these books as something invented to beguile the idle hour, but as living creatures, caught in the very behavior of living, surprised behind their misleading severity of form and phrase. He was eavesdropping upon the past, being let into the great world that had plunged and glittered and sumptuously sinned long before little western towns were dreamed of. Those rapt evenings beside the lamp gave him a long perspective, influenced his conception of the people around him, made him know just what he wished his own relations with these people to be. For some reason, his reading made him wish to become an architect. If the judge had left his bone library behind him in Kentucky, his nephew's life might have turned out very differently. I just thought that was so wonderful and such a great, succinct kind of description of why we read classics, why I love classics. That idea of eavesdropping on the past is so wonderful because I do think of classics as a conversation. It's like a conversation one-on-one between you and the author, but at the same time you're part of this greater conversation that has just extended across generations of readers from all around the world, all different cultures. And you know, a classic maybe has influenced history and influences the way people think and speak, but it also is such an immediate, tangible thing. Like, it's just you and the author talking one-on-one. I love how classics can speak to you in a different way at different times of your life too, which, speaking of that, maybe Virginia Woolf would be a good book to pick up next to tell you about. Mrs. Dalloway. I have read quite a bit of Virginia Woolf before, but the first time I read her, I was not a fan. Back in high school and college, just didn't speak to me. I didn't get it. I didn't catch the rhythm of it. I feel like Virginia Woolf does have such a wonderful rhythm, but then she also has such great descriptions of like just feelings and situations that you can relate to. So it's like while you're reading, you have to stop every other paragraph, every other sentence, and just sort of stare off into space and like follow the train of thought that, you know, Virginia Woolf kind of started you on. That ironically is the mark of a classic, that it's not that it doesn't keep your attention, like obviously you do read it the whole way through, but while you're reading it, you're like led off onto these kind of tangents of your own thoughts. That's why it's like a conversation. And in that way, the classic kind of reinvents itself for every reader, because every reader has different kind of conversations with the author, and every generation sees a classic differently. It's like it's never fully done talking. Mrs. Dalloway takes place on a day in June, which is why I thought it would be fun to start it during the month of June. It is kind of like a trip to London. I love her description of this character getting ready for the party, but of course that's really just the veneer on top. It goes down so deep. So many evocative descriptions and beautiful thoughts. Here's how she describes Big Ben striking. There, out it boomed. First a warning, musical, then the hour, irrevocable. Here's another passage I liked. It's about another character that Mrs. Dalloway is not a fan of. And this character, all her soul rusted with that grievance sticking in it. Her dismissal from school during the war, poor embittered, unfortunate creature. For it was not her one hated, but the idea of her, which undoubtedly had gathered into itself a great deal that was not Miss Kilman, had become one of those specters with which one battles in the night, one of those specters who stand astride us and suck up half our lifeblood, dominators and tyrants. For no doubt with another throw of the dice, had the black been uppermost and not the white, she would have loved Miss Kilman, but not in this world. That is just such a keen insight. There are definitely people who, you feel annoyed with or you dislike, but if you really paid attention, you would realize that a lot of the things you're projecting on that person are demons in your own mind, and they're not necessarily part of that person's character at all. I think it was a line from To the Lighthouse that was something about how if you looked closely at a person, you couldn't hate them. You'd have to love them. But of course, it's difficult to look closely. We get distracted. Mrs. Dalloway is certainly, you could say distracted, but also sort of distracted with deep thoughts as she is making her way through London. I'm only about 12 pages into my reread, and I'd forgotten until I picked it up again how you have to read Virginia Woolf slowly to let yourself think things through. So I'm hoping I'll be able to finish it throughout the month of June. We'll see. This I did finish. I started this back in May. It's The Tempest by Shakespeare. This was a reread for me. I am hoping to make this a Shakespearean summer and reread. I'm thinking I'll start Othello next. But just some of the more popular, more famous ones, because last year I read a lot of the lesser-known Shakespeares that were new to me, and even in them, there were those famous lines, sayings that are just part of the vernacular, part of the way everyone speaks, and we don't even realize that we're speaking Shakespeare. That's another thing that is so wonderful about reading classics, is that you kind of discover these things that were already part of your thinking, part of your language, but you didn't know just where they came from. This is the Ardent Shakespeare, and it has really excellent notes, which on the one hand, I like to just read Shakespeare, and just sort of immerse yourself in the language, but it's also fascinating to stop and really read the notes and, understand the context, kind of enter into another conversation between the commentators of Shakespeare, because this editor is constantly talking about what some other editor said and what he thinks is right. So there are a lot of phrases and aphorisms from Shakespeare that are in our language. But of course, in Shakespeare, there are lots of phrases or images or references to other classical sources. And in this one, it was a reference to the widow Dido. And the widow Dido, as you may or may not know, was related to Aeneas. So I would really like to read the Aeneid by Virgil. Again, I read this back in college, but it's been such a long time. I'd love to try it again. This is translated by Robert Fitzgerald. He also has translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey, which I have on my shelves, which I was also kind of tempted to pick up. But if you watched my reading vlogs last year, you'll know why I'm reading Virgil. It's because last year I read Dante's Divine Comedy, the Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. All of them absolutely wonderful. All of them also, if you're looking for a classic to just get into this summer, I would highly recommend Dante. These are the Dorothy Sayers translations. Dorothy Sayers wrote the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries. I just absolutely adore her. She is one of my favorite authors. I might have to add her as number 4. We already have Jane Austen, Elizabeth Goodrich, P.G. Wodehouse, but number 4 might well be Dorothy Sayers. Anyway, I'd been meaning to get to her Dante translations, and so I was very excited about them. If you do read them, make sure you do not stop at Inferno. I liked Purgatorio and Paradiso even better than Inferno, and of course Paradiso is the end goal, so definitely continue on with Dante and Virgil, because Virgil is guiding Dante through hell and purgatory, and then it's Beatrice who is his guide once he gets up to heaven. There are tons and tons of different classical allusions in Dante. I probably should put together a reading list from the Divine Comedy, because I remember there were lots of references, things referenced in the notes, which Dorothy Sayers' notes are just the best. It totally feels like you're just sitting down and chatting with someone who absolutely loves Dante and knows Dante. Anyway, it seems like Virgil kind of has to top the list of Dante references because he's Dante's guide through 2 of the books. So I thought it'd be really neat to return to the Aeneid. So I mentioned this translation is by Fitzgerald, but to tell the truth, I actually have started listening to it as an audiobook. I just have been listening to the free LibriVox version, which, I don't know, I'm kind of thinking I should just sit down, research it, find a good audiobook narrator, and buy it. Because this is how it always goes with LibriVox audiobooks. It's like the first chapter is great. It has an amazing narrator. Second, maybe has some issues. You can hear the pages crinkling, the audio's not the best, but it's still okay. The third chapter is a third narrator who really is not great. And then, of course, it ends up being the narrator who's not great, who like actually does the work and does all the chapters, which is like, I respect them for doing the work, but if I don't like their narration. The LibriVox Aeneid that I've been listening to is actually translated by Dryden, which, if you know classics, classic poetry, Dryden is probably a name you've heard. Yet another sort of conversational element to classics, even like the translations, especially from the past. Some of the best translations are done by authors who wrote other amazing works. Like Athos was actually reading a Dante translated by Longfellow. Anyway, I do like Dryden's translation of the Aeneid. I think I'm midway through book 2, so Aeneas has just met the widow Dido and is telling her all about the experience of his experience during the Trojan War. So really, I probably should have gone back and read Iliad, Odyssey, and then the Aeneid, because of course the Iliad is the tale of the Trojan War. The Odyssey is one of the characters, Odysseus, his attempts to make it home. Odysseus is a Greek, but Aeneas is a Trojan, so he and his fellow Trojans have been kicked out of Troy and are trying to find a new land. That new land is destined to be Rome. Virgil was writing for a Roman emperor and was, trying to connect the legacy of Troy with the legacy of Rome. So there's all sorts of interesting historical context, but then just the language is so beautiful. In the Dryden translation, there was a line about how a bird cleaves the yielding air, and I just came across that quoted somewhere. It might have been in Elizabeth Goudge. But here at my farmhouse, I often have birds that fly pretty darn close. I got a clip recently of the bird like right in front of the camera. But that's just such a beautiful image, and I'm wondering if that's original to Virgil. It was the Divine Comedy that led me to pick up the Aeneid again, but the Divine Comedy also led me to pick up Paradise Lost by Milton, the Divine Comedy, and Dorothy Sayers. So I have this book here, Letters to a Diminished Church. I cannot recommend this highly enough. It is nonfiction by Dorothy Sayers, writing about challenges that Christians face in her time period after World War II. But like, honestly, it's so relatable. It's really just challenges Christians face. There were so many good essays, but the one all about the Faust legend and the idea of the devil. See, this is no good. Now I'm going to have to reread Faust next. But in that essay, she talks about Dante, of course, because we do see the devil in Inferno, and she talks about Faust, and she talks about Paradise Lost by Milton. Milton's invocation at the very beginning is so beautiful. Chiefly thou, O Spirit, that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure, instruct me, for thou knowest, thou from the first was present, and with mighty wings outspread, dove-like, sat brooding on the vast abyss, and made it pregnant. What in me is dark illumine, what is low raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. So yes, in Paradise Lost, of course, the devil falls from heaven, falls from God's grace, and then we have Adam and Eve, and like all the devils are horrified by this idea that God would create humanity. There is also Paradise Regained, which I have never read before, so I'm kind of hoping to reread Paradise Lost and then go on. I'm kind of wondering if I should look for an audiobook of this as well. We're going to be doing a fair bit of driving this summer, so it would be great to have some audiobooks lined up to dive into. Really, the Iliad and the Odyssey would be excellent to listen to as audiobooks because, of course, they were first spoken. That the original tradition was an oral tradition. But I don't know that I'll be doing enough driving to get to all of that this summer. So I'll probably end up reading some and finding an audiobook for others. So as I've been talking about the Divine Comedy, you might have noticed there are only 2 books here, and there are 3 in the Divine Comedy. Well, that's because Porthos has borrowed Purgatorio. And Porthos, if you're watching this and you've finished reading Purgatorio, please bring it back to me so that I can put it back on my shelves. However, I know that I will not forget to get Purgatorio back from Porthos because I'm holding some of his books hostage. And I haven't even started this yet, so I'm not ready to return it to you, Porthos. I hope you're not looking for it. C.S. Lewis is certainly a classic author, but this is not his usual subject. It is science fiction. Out of the Silent Planet, the beginning of a celebrated space trilogy, which is continued in Paralandra and That Hideous Strength. Yeah, so C.S. Lewis is, of course, best known for Screwtape Letters, The Great Divorce. Both of those are so good, would be excellent summer reading if you're looking for a summer classic. And then, of course, Chronicles of Narnia. But it's so fun that he wrote so many different types of work. Porthos picked up this trilogy used. And when we were swapping books, he was like, you should read it. Why don't you borrow it? So what I'm going to do is finish this, and then I'll really bug Porthos to finish Purgatorio and give me back Purgatorio. So this stack is already probably too ambitious and probably not all going to happen this summer, but 2 other books that I do have here, which I've been meaning to reread for a while. These were 2 of my favorites that I read in college, and I just would love to revisit them and like see what I think of them now, see if the same things stand out to me. So they're both French authors, Blaise Pascal, Pensée. He's famous for having said, "The heart has reasons of which reason knows nothing." Love that one. Pensée is just different pensée, different thoughts. So it is often kind of shorter passages. Let's see, what did I highlight here? Let him both hate and love himself. He has within him the capacity for knowing truth and being happy, but he possesses no truth which is either abiding or satisfactory. Oh, so this is under contradictions, about showing how vile and how great man is. Pascal is also known for his theory of the wager, which is related to faith and God and the idea that, you know, maybe there is not a God and there's not a heaven and a hell. But if that's true, then, you know, after this life, there'll be nothing. It's not like you'll gain anything by not having faith in God. Whereas if you do have faith in God and try to structure your life around faith, and when you die, if there is an afterlife, you'll have won. So like if you're betting, really the good bet is on the life of the faith. So that's Pascal. This is the complete essays of Montaigne. Which I am not planning on reading all of them because it's quite thick, but I think this also would be great to just kind of dip into and read a couple. Let's see what we have. A Consideration upon Cicero, Not Communicating One's Glory, Of Drunkenness. The titles are just great. They make you want to sit down and read it right now. I was going to read you the beginning of the introduction, which is a nice summation of Montaigne. Montaigne resists simple definitions. He is the first essayist, a skeptic, an acute student of himself and of man, a champion of a man-based morality, a vivid and charming stylist, and many other things besides. No one description tells nearly enough, and indeed it is hard to see which one to place at the center. Doesn't that make you want to read Montaigne? It makes me want to read Montaigne, and so hopefully I will get to a couple of these essays, because we only read a couple in college, so there are lots in here that I have not read. Oh my goodness, look at this. There's a Disney Cruise Line Castaway Club thing in here. Oh, it's been too long since I was on the Disney Cruise Line. But yes, I loved that description from the introduction, that he defies description and defies simple definitions, because that also is the mark of a classic. Classics defy genre. Like, you can't pin them in one hole because they cover such a range of human experience and such a range of different themes that, you know, they really don't belong in one genre. I'm not a fan of genres either. I feel like if it's a good book, it's a good book, and I want to check it out. If it has good writing, interesting insights, interesting plot, interesting characters, like, the genre is to a certain extent irrelevant. This is always the struggle for me. Do I take the thumbnail with the spines not showing, so there's like a little air of mystery? What'd she pick? Or do I take the thumbnail with the spines showing, which also creates an air of intrigue, like, oh, what's that? That looks cool. Or, oh, I've been thinking of reading that too. Anyway, I'm gonna get my thumbnail shot real quick. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I would love to hear about what you're planning to read this summer down in the comments. Do you have any classics on your list? If you're not yet subscribed, make sure you click that button. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. I hope you have a wonderful summer. Stay bookish. Bye, guys.